Welcome. Tonight, I would like to invite you to find a place of absolute comfort. Adjust your pillows, pull the blankets close, and let the weight of your body sink into the bed. We are going on a journey through time and stone to a place where the world opens up to reveal its deepest secrets. Imagine you are standing on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. It is late afternoon, that golden hour when the sun hangs low and heavy in the sky. The heat of the day is beginning to radiate away from the rocks, replaced by a cool, refreshing breeze that carries the distinct, sweet scent of pinyon pine and Utah juniper. It's a clean, earthy fragrance that feels like the very essence of the high desert. As you stand here, at the very edge of the plateau, the world seems to fall away. Below you is an abyss of such immense proportions that the mind struggles to find a point of reference. The canyon is vast, stretching approximately 277 miles through the rugged landscape of northern Arizona. At its widest point, the distance across to the north rim is 18 miles. From this height, the massive formations within the canyon look like miniature castles and temples, though they are, in reality, mountains of their own. The silence here is majestic. It isn't the absence of sound, but rather a profound stillness. You might hear the distant lonely cry of a raven soaring on an updraft, or the softest sigh of wind passing through the needles of a nearby tree. Everything feels distant, peaceful, and ancient. The colors of the rock are beginning to shift as the sun dips lower. The vibrant oranges and reds are deepening into shades of ochre, vermilion, and soft, dusty violet. If you enjoy these quiet explorations and would like to join me for more nightly journeys, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. And if you find this atmosphere helpful for your rest, perhaps gently leave a like on the video. It helps our community grow and allows others who are seeking a peaceful night's sleep to find their way here. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out. Let the tension leave your shoulders. Let your mind come as still as the canyon air. We are about to begin a descent, not just in elevation, but through the history of our planet. The ground you are standing on is not just dirt and rock. It is the final chapter of a story that began hundreds of millions of years ago. As the shadows begin to stretch and the colors of the cliffs deepen, we turn our gaze downward. We are standing on the very top layer of this geological masterpiece, a threshold between the world we know and the ancient worlds buried beneath our feet. To begin our journey, we must look closely at the very rock supporting our weight. Look down at your feet. The very ground you are standing on has a name, the Kaibab limestone. It is the topmost layer of the canyon, the sturdy cap that defines the rim. In the soft light of the fading sun, the rock appears as a beautiful creamy white or pale buff color, sometimes shifting into a subtle grayish tan. It feels solid and dependable, a thick crust of stone that has resisted the elements for millions of years. As you run your hand over a weathered piece of this limestone, you are touching the remains of a world that no longer exists. This layer was formed roughly 270 million years ago. At that time, the Earth looked very different. There were no people, no birds, and the first dinosaurs were still tens of millions of years away from appearing. Instead, this entire region, this vast, dry desert, was submerged beneath the surface of a warm, shallow sea. It was a peaceful, tropical environment, perhaps not unlike the quiet coastal waters of a modern tropical island. For millions of years, tiny marine organisms lived and died in those waters. Their shells and skeletons, made of calcium carbonate, drifted slowly down through the blue depths, settling on the sea floor like a gentle underwater snowfall. Over incredible stretches of time, the weight of the water and the layers of sediment above pressed these remains together, turning them into the hard, resilient rock we see today. If you were to look very closely at the stone beneath you, you might find the fossilized impressions of those ancient inhabitants, delicate brachiopods that looked like modern clams, or the lace-like patterns of bryozoans. These creatures once thrived in a sun-drenched ocean, and now they are frozen in time, held within the very foundation of the South Rim. Within the limestone, you might also notice small, irregular lumps of a harder rock called chert. These nodules often weather out more slowly than the surrounding limestone, creating a rugged, pebbly texture on the surface of the trail. They are like small, flinty jewels hidden within the stone, remnants of silica that gathered on the ancient ocean floor. It is a strange and wonderful realization to stand here over 7,000 feet above the current sea level and know that you are walking on an ancient seabed. The world has tilted and risen, the oceans have retreated across the continents, and yet the evidence of that watery past remains preserved in the pale stone. The Kaibab limestone is the final, youngest chapter written in the canyon's walls, yet it is already so old that our human lives seem like a single heartbeat in comparison. Feel the stability of this ancient floor. It is hundreds of feet thick, a massive slab of history that protects the softer layers beneath it. If this layer were not so hard and resistant to erosion, the Grand Canyon might not have its iconic, sharp-edged rim. As the wind brushes past you, carrying the cooling air of the evening, you can almost imagine the faint, ghostly echo of those ancient waves. But the sea did not stay forever. As we begin our mental descent, leaving the safety of the top edge behind, we move deeper into the past. We are stepping off the rim and descending just a few hundred feet, where the creamy white cliffs begin to transition into a new color and a new story. As we begin our quiet descent, the path beneath our feet changes slightly. We have left the very top edge of the world and are now moving into the Toro Weep Formation. This layer, though often overshadowed by the grand cliffs below, holds a unique beauty in its subtlety. If you look at the canyon walls here, you will notice a soft shift in the palette of the stone. The brilliant creamy white of the limestone above begins to deepen, turning into a darker, more somber yellowish gray. It is the color of a sandy beach on an overcast afternoon, or the hue of ancient parchment. The Toro Weep Formation is a record of a restless earth. About 273 million years ago, the great sea that had covered this region began a slow, reluctant retreat. As the water grew shallower, it left behind lagoons and tidal flats. Imagine a vast, quiet expanse of water barely moving, shimmering under a prehistoric sun. In these quiet pockets, the water evaporated, leaving behind minerals like gypsum. Gypsum is a soft, pale mineral, often found in these layers as thin ribbons or crystalline clusters. It is a signature of evaporation, the physical ghost of a sea that simply vanished into the air. Mixed with this gypsum is siltstone, a rock made from particles even finer than sand. This silt was carried by slow-moving rivers or gentle coastal currents, settling in the calm waters of the retreating shore. It creates a texture that is smoother and more crumbly than the hard limestone above. As you imagine yourself walking along this section of the canyon, you might notice how these rocks feel different, perhaps a bit more earthy, a bit more fragile. This layer is a bridge between worlds. It marks the moment when the marine life of the deep ocean gave way to the shifting, muddy boundaries of the coast. It is a reminder that nothing in nature is static. The very ground we stand on is the result of a constant, slow motion, ebb and flow. Let's take a moment here to simply be present in this space. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out even more slowly. Feel the weight of your body settling. The rock beneath you has held its position for hundreds of millions of years. It is solid, unmoving, and completely supportive. There is no rush. We are simply traveling through time, one layer at a time. As we continue our journey downward, the yellowish-gray slopes of the Tora Weep begin to taper off. The environment is changing again, moving away from the damp, salty flats of a retreating sea. We are approaching a boundary where the water disappears entirely, replaced by something much larger and more formidable. Ahead of us, the canyon walls are about to transform into towering, pale cliffs that tell a story of wind, heat, and endless sand. As we continue our steady descent, the yellowish-gray slopes of the Tora Weep give way to one of the most unmistakable and majestic features of the canyon, the Coconino Sandstone. This layer is impossible to miss. It forms a massive, vertical cliff of pale, creamy white to tan stone that stands like a fortress wall against the sky. While the layers above were formed by the gentle ebb and flow of ancient seas, the Coconino tells a much different, much drier story. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the world as it was 275 million years ago. The water has vanished. In its place, a vast, scorching desert stretches across the horizon as far as the eye can see. This was an earth, a sea of sand, larger than any desert in North America today. The Coconino Sandstone is, quite literally, a desert frozen in time. The towering cliffs you see today were once giant, shifting dunes, some reaching heights of several hundred feet. If you were to run your hand along the surface of this rock, you would feel the distinct gritty texture of ancient grains. If you look closely at the face of the cliff, you will notice a beautiful geological phenomenon known as cross-bedding. These are long, graceful slopes and sweeping curves etched into the stone, tilting at sharp angles. These aren't random patterns. They are the literal slopes of the dunes as they were sculpted by the wind millions of years ago. By measuring the direction of these frozen slopes, geologists have determined that the winds of that era blew consistently from the north, pushing the sand into these massive rhythmic waves. There is something deeply peaceful about standing in the shadow of a fossilized desert. The sand that once whistled through the air in a restless dance is now perfectly still, held in a silent, stony embrace. The sheer scale of it is humbling. The thickness of this layer reminds us of just how long that ancient sun beat down on those dunes and how much sand was carried here by the invisible hands of the wind. Take a moment now to let your mind drift, much like those ancient grains of sand. Feel the stability of the canyon around you. The air here is often a little cooler in the shade of these great white walls, providing a soft contrast to the idea of the desert heat that created them. Your breathing is slow, steady, and effortless. You are safe in this cathedral of time, supported by layers of history that have remained unmoved for eons. As we reach the bottom of these sheer, pale cliffs, the landscape undergoes another dramatic shift. The dry, windswept world of the Coconino ends abruptly, meeting a layer that is much darker, softer, and more colorful. We are leaving the heights of the desert and descending into a lower, flatter realm. Below the white sands lies a world of deep rust-red slopes, where the air was once thick with moisture and the ground was carpeted in ancient green. We are moving from the dunes into the damp, muddy memories of the Hermit Shale. As you look down from the sheer white cliffs of the Coconino, you see the canyon floor widen out into a series of broad, sloping benches. This is the Hermit Shale, and its appearance is a gentle departure from the vertical walls above. While the sandstone we just left stands tall and defiant, the Hermit Shale is soft, yielding, and humble. It does not form sharp cliffs. Instead, it erodes into long, graceful inclines that look like heavy, rust-colored velvet, draped over the lower foundations of the canyon. The color here is a deep, rich red, a hue so saturated it seems to glow when the late afternoon sun strikes the slopes. This color comes from iron oxide, essentially natural rust that coats the fine grains of silt and clay. These materials were not blown here by the wind, but were carried by slow-moving rivers and settled in quiet, muddy floodplains and swampy lowlands approximately 280 million years ago. If you could step back into that time, the dry desert heat of the layer above would be replaced by a thick, humid atmosphere. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine the air as it was then, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the lush fragrance of growing things. Here, in the quiet mud of the Hermit Shale, the earth preserved the delicate imprints of ancient life. In these rocks, geologists find fossils of ferns with intricate, lacy fronds, and the remains of early seed-bearing plants that once shaded the muddy banks. Perhaps most incredible are the traces of the creatures that move through this green world. There are footprints of small, primitive reptiles and the fossilized remains of giant insects, ancestors of the dragonfly with wingspans much larger than those we see today, humming through the warm, still air. It was a world of slow movements and steady growth, a place where water and mud combined to create a nursery for life. It is a curious thing to contemplate, this massive desert of the Coconino sitting directly on top of a lush, swampy landscape. In the grand timeline of the earth, environments can shift with a patient, unstoppable momentum. A changing climate or the slow drift of the continents can turn a verdant forest into a parched wasteland, or a shallow sea into a mountain range. The boundary between these two layers is a silent witness to a world in constant flux, a reminder that even the most enduring landscapes have lived many different lives. As you rest your gaze on these red slopes, Feel the weight of your body settling comfortably into your bed. The softness of the shale is reflected in the relaxation of your muscles. There is no hurry here. The transition from swamp to desert took millions of years, and you have all the time you need to rest. The mud that turned to stone is now part of the very ground that supports you, steady and unmoving. The hermit shale acts as a wide, red pedestal, leading us further down toward the most prominent feature of the canyon's interior. Below these soft slopes, the ground drops away again, revealing a wall of rock so massive and so perfectly vertical that it defines the very architecture of the inner canyon. We are approaching the Great Red Wall Limestone, a fortress of stone that holds the secrets of a much deeper, much older sea. As we descend from the soft, sloping skirts of the Hermit Shale, we find ourselves standing at the edge of the most formidable and recognizable feature in the entire Grand Canyon, the Red Wall Limestone. It is a sheer vertical cliff that drops away beneath your feet for 500 feet or more, an unbroken wall of stone that acts as a massive interior fortress. When the late afternoon sun strikes these cliffs, they glow with a deep, radiant crimson, a color so intense it seems to hold the warmth of the desert itself. This is the landmark that hikers and river runners look for, a monumental barrier that defines the middle depths of the canyon. But there is a gentle secret hidden behind this vibrant facade. If you were to take a geologist's hammer and carefully chip away a small piece of the surface, you would discover that the rock inside is not red at all. Beneath that thin outer skin, the Red Wall Limestone is actually a soft, elegant, grayish white. The brilliant red color we see is merely a stain, a natural paint applied over millions of years. As rainwater trickles through the iron-rich layers of the Hermit Shale and the Supai group above, it carries with it tiny particles of iron oxide, essentially rust. This rust-colored water washes down the face of the limestone, dyeing the pale rock in shades of brick and ochre, creating the masterpiece of color that gives the layer its name. It is a reminder that beauty often comes from the way one thing influences another, a slow and steady sharing of color across the ages. Take a moment to notice the shift in the air as we move deeper into the canyon's heart. Up on the rim, the wind was dry and carried the scent of sun-baked dust. Here, in the shadow of the Great Red Wall, the air feels noticeably cooler. It is a heavy, still coolness that seems to emanate from the stone itself. The temperature drops as we descend, wrapping around you like a soft, cool sheet. Feel that coolness on your skin and let it signal to your body that it is time to sink even deeper into relaxation. The canyon is holding you now, protected by these massive walls that have stood for 330 million years. The Red Wall Limestone was formed in a vast, clear, and shallow sea that once covered the interior of the continent. It is composed almost entirely of the skeletal remains of countless marine organisms, tiny crinoids, corals, and shelled creatures that lived and died in a tropical paradise. Their remains settled in thick, heavy layers on the ocean floor, compressing over eons into the solid, unyielding rampart we see today. It is a layer of incredible consistency, a testament to a long period of stability in the Earth's history. Yet, even in a wall this massive, there are mysteries in the silence. As we look closely at the contact points where the red wall meets the layers below, we begin to see that the story of the Earth is not always a continuous one. There are places where the rock seems to simply stop, and another begins, with no record of what happened in between. We are standing on the threshold of the hidden gaps of time, the moments where the pages of history were washed away before the next chapter could be written. As we continue our descent, we peer into these shadows, looking for the traces of a layer that almost wasn't there, a phantom in the stone that appears and disappears as we travel along the canyon's length. Just beneath the massive stained skirts of the red wall, we find a layer that plays a logic-defying game of hide-and-seek with the eye. This is the Temple Butte limestone, often called the disappearing layer. In the western reaches of the canyon, it stands as a prominent cliff, hundreds of feet thick. But as we look here, in the central heart of the gorge, it becomes something much more subtle. It appears only in scattered pockets, purplish gray lenses of rock that fill in ancient bowl-shaped depressions in the layer below. It is a ghost of a landscape, a reminder that the earth does not always build upward. Sometimes it pauses to take away. The Temple Butte represents the Devonian period, roughly 385 million years ago. But between it and the layers beneath, there is a staggering silence in the stone. To understand why this layer is so thin or entirely absent in some places, we have to imagine the canyon floor as it was long before the limestone settled. Before this rock was formed, the land was exposed to the elements for millions of years. Ancient rivers and streams carved deep, winding channels into the older rock, creating a rugged, uneven surface. When the seas finally returned, the sediment filled those low-lying valleys first, like water pooling in the furrows of a plowed field. Because of this, the Temple Butte limestone is not a continuous band, but a series of snapshots. In some places, the record is thick and clear. In others, the transition from one era to the next happens in the space of a single, thin line where two different worlds touch. It is a profound realization to stand before these cliffs and understand that the canyon's history is like an ancient book where some of the pages have been carefully, cleanly torn out. We call these gaps unconformities, places where time passed, but no rock remains to tell us what happened. Perhaps a mountain range rose and was ground into dust, or perhaps a great forest grew and withered away, leaving nothing behind but the empty space between two layers of stone. Take a slow, deep breath and let the weight of that missing time settle over you. It is a peaceful thought, knowing that not every moment must be recorded to be significant. Just as we let go of the day's events to find rest, the earth too has let go of entire epochs, leaving us with a beautiful, fragmented mystery. As we continue our descent, leaving the purple-tinted shadows of the Temple Butte behind, the character of the canyon begins to change again. The stark vertical walls of the upper layers start to give way to something softer and more expansive. The colors shift from the oranges and deep reds of the heights to a palette of muted, earthy tones. We are entering the Tonto group, a trio of layers that brings with it a soft, mossy green hue, signaling our arrival at an even older world, one that existed long before the first creature ever walked on dry land. The air here feels even more ancient, heavy with the scent of deep time and the cooling breath of the river that draws closer with every step. As we step down from the remnants of the Temple Butte, we find ourselves standing upon the Muav limestone. This is the uppermost layer of what geologists call the Tonto Group, a trio of rock layers that tells the story of one of the most significant changes in the history of our planet. Notice how the colors around you have shifted. The fiery oranges and deep rusted reds of the upper cliffs have softened into a mottled, muted palette of greenish gray and dusty tan. This color is a whisper from the deep past, a sign that we have entered a truly marine world. The Muav limestone formed approximately 505 million years ago during the Cambrian period. At that time, the area we now know as the American Southwest was not a high desert plateau, but a low-lying coastal region. If you were to look out across the horizon back then, you wouldn't see mountains or canyons. You would see a vast, shallow sea stretching toward the sunset. This rock layer is the physical remains of that ancient seafloor. It is composed of the calcium carbonate from countless tiny marine organisms and the fine silt that settled in the calm, deeper waters away from the shore. This layer represents what geologists call a transgressing sea. It is a beautiful, patient word. It describes a time when the global sea levels were slowly rising or the land was gently sinking, allowing the ocean to creep further and further inland. Imagine the water moving with agonizing slowness, reclaiming the land inch by inch, century by century. There was no violence in this takeover, just the steady, rhythmic advance of the tides. The Muav limestone was deposited in the deeper, quieter parts of that sea where the water was clear and the influence of the land was distant. As you trail your hand along the cool, textured surface of the Muav, try to visualize the rhythm of those ancient oceans. For eons, the earth has breathed in this way, with the seas rising to cover the continents and then receding to reveal them once more. It is a slow planetary heartbeat. Just as your own breath rises and falls in the quiet of the night, the earth has its own cycles of rest and movement. There is a profound stability in this realization that the ground beneath you has been a seabed, a desert, a forest, and a mountain range, all in its own time. Take a moment to simply exist here. In this greenish-gray corridor of stone, the air is still and the light is soft, filtered by the immense depth of the canyon above. The Muav limestone forms a series of ledges and small cliffs, stepping down like a giant staircase toward the heart of the gorge. But as we continue our descent, the rock begins to change its character once again. The hard, stubborn limestone starts to give way to something much softer and more delicate. We are moving from the solid walls of the Muav into a layer that prefers to crumble rather than stand tall. The purple and olive-toned slopes of the bright Angel Shale. The transition is subtle, a softening of the landscape that prepares us for the wide open spaces that lie just ahead. As the steep greenish walls of the Muav limestone pull back, the canyon suddenly opens up into a vast horizontal expanse known as the Tonto Platform. It is a striking change in the landscape. After descending through hundreds of feet of vertical cliffs, you find yourself standing on a wide, level bench that stretches out as far as the eye can see, following the contour of the river far below. This spacious terrace exists because of the bright Angel Shale, a layer of rock that is much softer and more easily eroded than the sturdy limestones above it. While the harder rocks stand their ground as towering walls, this shale gently gives way, crumbling into long sloping hillsides and creating this broad walking platform that feels like a hidden world tucked between the rims. The colors here shift into a palette of earthy purples, dusky sage greens, and soft, muted grays. Underfoot, the ground feels different, less like solid stone and more like a fine, compressed mud. And that is exactly what it once was. About 515 million years ago, this area was a muddy seafloor, teeming with the very beginnings of complex life. If you were to sit quietly on a ledge of this purple shale and look closely at the broken fragments near your feet, you might find the fossilized remains of a world long gone. This layer is famous for its trilobites, ancient marine creatures with segmented shells and many tiny legs, looking a bit like the pill bugs you might find in a garden today, or perhaps like small aquatic horseshoe crabs. Imagine these little explorers scuttling across the silty bottom of a warm, shallow sea. They lived their entire lives in the dim, filtered light of the Cambrian Ocean, leaving behind delicate tracks and burrows in the mud. Today, those burrows are preserved as tiny, stone-filled tubes frozen in time. It is a quiet, humbling thought to realize that these small, fragile lives were part of the very foundation of the world we see today. They were not giants, but they were persistent, and their presence is etched forever into the heart of the canyon. Take a deep, slow breath and let your mind drift back to that ancient underwater world. There is no rush here. The Tonto platform is a place of immense stillness. Because the shale is so soft, it doesn't hold the heat the way the darker rocks do, and a gentle breeze often sweeps across this open bench, carrying the faint scent of desert scrub and sun-warmed stone. Hikers often use this platform to travel long distances through the canyon, as it provides a level path through an otherwise vertical wilderness. It is a place of transition, a moment of rest before the canyon plunges even deeper. As we walk across this wide purple bench, we are approaching the very bottom of the Tonto Group, the three-layered sequence of rocks that tells the story of the first great sea to wash over this land. We have moved through the limestone of the deep water and the shale of the muddy offshore, and now we are nearing the final horizontal layer of the upper canyon. Beneath the soft slopes of the Bright Angel shale lies a rugged, blocky foundation that marks the very beginning of this sequence. It is a layer of stone that remembers the sound of crashing waves and the weight of the incoming tide, the sturdy dark Tapetes sandstone. This is the last of the flat, orderly pages in our geological book before the story becomes much older and much more complex. As the soft, purple-hued slopes of the Bright Angel Shale begin to level out, we find our path leads us to the edge of a new kind of stone. This is the Tapetes sandstone, the rugged and reliable foundation of the upper canyon. Unlike the crumbly shale we've just left behind, the Tapetes is composed of thick, blocky cliffs that look as though they were built by a giant hand to support the weight of the world above. Its color is a rich, weathered chocolate brown, sometimes fading into a deep, toasted tan where the sun has kissed it for thousands of years. If you were to reach out and touch this rock, you would feel its coarse, gritty texture. It is made of large grains of sand and even small pebbles, all cemented together by time and pressure. This texture tells a story of energy and movement. About 525 million years ago, this wasn't a quiet desert or a deep sea. It was a high-energy shoreline. You are standing on the remnants of an ancient beach. Visualize the scene as it once was. There were no trees then, no grass, and no birds in the sky. There was only the vast, rocky expanse of a primordial continent and the relentless, rhythmic power of the ocean. The Tapete sandstone represents the very moment the sea began to march across the land. Huge waves, driven by winds from an empty sky, crashed against the shore, grinding up the rock and leaving behind thick deposits of sand and gravel. This layer is the physical record of that ancient tide, a frozen memory of the sea's first arrival. As you contemplate the power of those ancient waves, let your own body find that same sense of steady, rhythmic calm. Take a moment to notice how heavy your limbs feel, supported completely by the surface beneath you. Just as the Tapete sandstone provides a solid, unwavering base for the miles of rock stacked above it, let yourself feel grounded and secure. There is no need to carry any tension. Like the stone, you can simply exist in this space, heavy and relaxed. The Tapete is the last of the horizontal layers, the final chapter in the story of the Flat Canyon. It sits like a lid on top of a much deeper, much older mystery. When we look closely at the very bottom of this sandstone cliff, where it meets the rocks below, we find a line that is both beautiful and baffling to the mind. We are approaching what geologists call the Great Unconformity, a place where the clock of the earth seems to have stopped, leaving a gap in time so vast it is difficult to comprehend. We are standing on the edge of a profound silence in the geological record, preparing to step across a boundary that spans over 1 billion years. There is a sense of anticipation in the air, a quiet reverence for the secrets held in the darkness below this final layer of sandstone. Our journey is about to take us into the very basement of the world. Imagine you are standing at the very base of that chocolate-brown Tapete sandstone we just explored. You reach out your hand and place it firmly against the canyon wall. Under your palm, you feel the rough, gritty grains of the sandstone. But just an inch lower, the rock changes completely. It becomes harder, darker, and more crystalline. This thin, unassuming line is known as the Great Unconformity. It is one of the most famous features in all of geology, a place where the history of our planet simply pauses. If you were to place your thumb on the sandstone and your pinky on the dark rock below, your hand would be spanning a gap of over 1 billion years. The sandstone above is roughly 500 million years old. The rock directly beneath it is nearly 1,700,000,000 years old. In the space of a single heartbeat, the width of a knife's edge, a vast stretch of Earth's history has vanished. To put that into perspective, think of all the life we have discussed so far. The dinosaurs, the ancient seas, the trilobites, and the vast deserts. All of that combined fits into the last 500 million years. Now, imagine a span of time more than twice that long, completely erased from the record at this very spot. Where did those years go? They were worn away by the slow, patient work of wind and water, ground down into dust long before the first grain of the Tapete sandstone ever settled here. Entire mountain ranges rose up, stood for eons and were eventually leveled to a flat plain, all during this silent gap. It is a staggering thought, but let it bring you a sense of peace rather than overwhelm. Time on this scale is like a deep, slow-moving river. The missing billion years aren't a void. They are a testament to the Earth's incredible capacity for renewal and change. The planet has lived many lives before this one, and the great unconformity is where those lives touch. As you stand here at this intersection of the ancient and the even more ancient, take a long, slow breath. Feel the absolute stillness of the canyon. There is no rush here. The stone has waited for billions of years, and it is in no hurry now. You are safe in the presence of this immense history, tucked away in a place where time itself seems to hold its breath. We are leaving the world of horizontal layers now. As we step across this line and continue our descent, the canyon begins to change character. The walls draw closer together, the colors darken into deep purples and blacks, and the air feels cooler and more pressurized. We are entering the inner gorge, the deepest sanctuary of the Grand Canyon. Here, we are no longer looking at the skin of the earth, but its very bones, the basement of the world. We are moving into a realm where the rocks were forged in fire and pressure, far beneath the surface of a world that existed before the continents even had their current shapes. As we descend further, notice how the light changes, reflecting off the harder, polished surfaces of these ancient primal stones. As we continue our descent into these deeper reaches, your eyes might catch a strange and beautiful sight. For most of our journey, we have been surrounded by perfectly flat horizontal layers, the great layer cake of the canyon. But now, in certain sections of the inner gorge, the geometry of the earth shifts. Beneath the flat foundation of the tapeat sandstone, you may see thick wedges of rock that are not horizontal at all. Instead, they are tilted at a sharp angle, leaning like a row of books on a shelf. This is the Grand Canyon supergroup. These tilted layers tell a story of a middle chapter in the Earth's history, a time long after the basement rocks were formed, but long before the first trilobites swam in the Cambrian seas. They are a collection of sedimentary and volcanic rocks that are roughly 800 million to over 1 billion years old. They represent a time when the Earth's crust was being pulled and stretched, causing massive blocks of land to drop down and tip over. It is a visual reminder that the Earth is never truly still. It shifts, it breaks, and it reforms in a slow, tectonic dance that spans millions of years. What makes the supergroup so fascinating is how rare it is to see. In many parts of the canyon, these layers are completely missing, wiped away by the same immense forces of erosion that created the great unconformity we just passed. They only survived in a few lucky places where they were tucked down into deep, faulted basins, protected from the elements like a precious letter hidden in a sturdy box. When you look at these tilted slopes, you are seeing a preserved fragment of a world that was almost entirely lost to time. These rocks even contain the very first hints of life, tiny fossilized structures called stromatolites, built by ancient colonies of blue-green algae in a world that existed long before trees, flowers, or even the simplest animals. As you walk past these angled slopes of dull red, deep purple, and dusty green, let your mind rest on the idea of protection. Just as these rocks were shielded from the forces of erosion for 1 billion years, let yourself feel shielded and secure in this quiet, low place. Take a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool, still air of the inner gorge fill your lungs. There is a profound stability here. The weight of the world above is held up by these sturdy, ancient foundations, and you are safely cradled within them. The path grows steeper now, and the walls begin to narrow even further as we approach the very floor of the canyon. The tilted wedges of the supergroup eventually fade behind us, and we find ourselves standing before the most ancient rocks of all. We have reached the very bottom of the geological record, the foundation upon which everything else is built. The colors shift again, losing the earthy reds and greens of the upper world and taking on a dark, shimmering, almost metallic quality. We are entering the realm of the Vishnu schist, the dark, majestic heart of the canyon, where the story of the earth reveals its most primal secrets. In this narrow corridor of stone, the air feels different, heavy with the weight of eons, and the sound of the river begins to grow from a distant hum into a steady, rhythmic pulse. As we step closer to these dark, shimmering walls, we are touching the very basement of the world. This is the Vishnu schist. It looks entirely different from any of the layers we have seen so far. While the limestone and sandstone above were laid down in neat horizontal sheets, the schist is a mesmerizing swirl of dark grays and deep blacks, marked by patterns that look like smoke caught in a mirror. It has a crystalline texture, catching the dim light of the inner gorge in a way that feels almost metallic, yet soft to the eye. Beside it, and often cutting right through it in bold, beautiful streaks, is the Zoroaster granite, a pale salmon-pink rock that provides a striking contrast to the darkness of the schist. These rocks are not sedimentary. They did not settle quietly at the bottom of a sea. They are metamorphic and igneous, forged in a world of unimaginable intensity. To create the Vishnu schist, ordinary silt and volcanic ash were buried miles beneath the surface. There, under the weight of an entire continent, they were subjected to such immense heat and pressure that they began to change. They didn't quite melt, but they became soft and pliable, stretching and folding like taffy. This is why the patterns you see are so wavy and fluid. You are looking at solid rock that once behaved like a slow-moving liquid, frozen in time for nearly 2 billion years. The pink Zoroaster granite tells a slightly different story. It was once molten magma, bubbling up from even deeper in the earth, forcing its way into the cracks of the schist, before cooling slowly into the hard, sparkling stone we see today. When you imagine the history of this place, let your mind wander to those depths, miles beneath the surface, where the earth is warm and the pressure is a constant, heavy embrace. There is a sense of profound transformation here, a reminder that even the hardest substances can be reshaped by time and patience. It is humbling to realize where we are standing. Geologists tell us that for these rocks to have formed the way they did, they must have been at least 10 to 15 miles underground. Above them once stood a massive range of mountains, perhaps as tall and jagged as the Himalayas are today. Over hundreds of millions of years, those mountains were ground down by the wind and rain until they were completely gone, leaving only their deep crystalline roots behind. We are standing in those roots now. The very foundation of a lost world has been brought into the light. It took nearly 2 billion years of waiting, buried in the dark, for these rocks to finally see the sun again. And as we look at these swirling patterns, we begin to realize that the stone didn't move upward on its own. It was revealed. Something had to peel back the miles of rock and earth to show us this heart of the canyon. The air here is cooler, dampened by the proximity of the water. If you listen closely, the deep silence of the stone is now layered with a new sound, a low, constant vibration that seems to thrum through the very soles of your feet. It is the sound of the great sculptor itself, the force that carved this path through the basement of time. We turn our gaze from the dark, ancient walls toward the center of the gorge, where a ribbon of moving energy cuts through the silence, continuing the work it started millions of years ago. Listen to that sound. It is no longer a distant whisper or a trick of the wind. It is a low, rhythmic pulse that seems to vibrate through the very air of the inner gorge. This is the voice of the Colorado River, the great architect of everything we have seen. From the rim, the river often looks like a tiny, motionless thread of turquoise or silver hidden at the bottom of a vast stone cathedral. But down here, at the level of the Vishnu schist, you can see it for what it truly is, a powerful, relentless force of nature, wide and deep, moving with a heavy, purposeful energy. As you look at the water, you might notice that it isn't always the clear, sparkling blue of a mountain lake. Depending on the time of year and the recent rains, the river takes on a thick, opaque quality. Sometimes it is a deep, mossy green. At other times, after a storm in the high country, it turns a rich chocolate brown. This color comes from the tools the river uses to do its work. It is a slurry of silt, clay, and fettuccine washed down from the plateau and carried along in the current. This isn't just water flowing past us. It is a liquid conveyor belt of earth and stone. To understand the sheer power of this movement, consider this. On an average day, the Colorado River carries approximately 380,000 tons of sediment through the Grand Canyon. It is difficult to visualize a number that large, but imagine thousands upon thousands of heavy dump trucks, all filled to the brim with sand and mud, being emptied into the water every single day, year after year. This sediment is the river's sandpaper, the grit that allows it to grind away at the solid rock beneath it. Take a moment now to breathe in the cool, damp air rising from the water's edge. Imagine the steady, rhythmic flow of the river as a metaphor for your own relaxation. Just as the water carries the silt and sand away toward the sea, imagine the current catching any lingering tensions or thoughts from your day. Let them be swept up in that heavy, powerful flow, moving steadily away from you, leaving only the cool, smooth surface of your mind behind. The river doesn't hurry. It simply persists. It has a job to do, and it does it with a calm, unstoppable grace. It is a strange and wonderful thing to see this liquid ribbon cutting through the hardest rock on earth. We have spent time looking at the Vishnu schist and the Zoroaster granite, rocks so dense and ancient that they seem immortal, and yet the river has sliced through them like a blade. You might wonder how something as soft as water, even water laden with silt, can possibly defeat the crystalline strength of granite. It seems like an impossible feat of nature, a battle between the fluid and the frozen. But as we stand here at the water's edge, watching the eddies swirl against the dark, polished walls of the inner gorge, we begin to see the secret of the river's success. It isn't just the water itself that carves the canyon, it is what the water carries within it, and the patient mechanical way it uses those tools against the stone. If you were to pour pure, filtered water over a block of solid granite for 1,000 years, you might see very little change. Water, on its own, is relatively gentle. But the Colorado River is never pure. It is a master craftsman that brings its own set of heavy tools to the workshop. Geologists often refer to the river's work as the sandpaper effect. To understand this, imagine a piece of rough, unfinished wood. If you rub your bare hand over it, the wood remains unchanged. But if you take a sheet of sandpaper lined with tiny, sharp grains of grit and apply even a soft, steady pressure, the wood begins to smooth and vanish. The river works in exactly the same way, using the earth itself as an abrasive against the earth. The debris carried by the water ranges from the microscopic to the massive. In the quieter, slower stretches of the canyon, fine silt and clay act like a polishing compound, buffing the dark surfaces of the ancient Vishnu schist until they shine with a dull, glassy luster. But when the river quickens, especially during the heavy flows of the spring melt, it picks up much larger tools. Pebbles, cobbles, and even massive boulders are lifted and rolled by the sheer volume of the rushing water. These stones aren't just sitting on the bottom. They are being tumbled along the riverbed in a process called saltation. If you were to stand at the water's edge during one of these high-flow events, you might hear a low, muffled rumbling coming from beneath the surface. It is the sound of stones clicking and clacking against one another, a rhythmic percussion of geological change. Each strike of a tumbling boulder is like a tiny hammer blow, fracturing the bedrock and chipping away small fragments of the canyon floor. Over the centuries, these millions of tiny impacts add up, allowing the river to bite deep into the heart of the continent. This constant movement makes the Colorado River a giant liquid conveyor belt. It is a system of transportation that never sleeps, moving the ruins of the Rocky Mountains and the high plateaus toward the sea. Every grain of sand you might find on a beach at the river's end was once part of a towering cliff or a mountain peak hundreds of miles upstream. It is a cycle of destruction and relocation that operates on a scale far beyond a human lifetime. Even now, as you settle into the stillness of your room, the river is down there in the dark, working with a steady, grinding persistence. It doesn't need to hurry because it possesses the ultimate luxury, the infinite patience of time. As we contemplate this incredible mechanical force, this grinding sandpaper of the ages, a natural question begins to emerge. We have seen the ancient age of the rocks, some nearly 2 billion years old, and we can see the deep scars the river has carved into them. But how long has this specific worker been on the job? Has the Colorado River been flowing through this landscape since the beginning of the world, or is it a relatively recent arrival in the grand story of the earth? To truly understand the majesty of the canyon, we must look not just at the depth of the gorge, but at the mystery of the clock that timed its creation. The age of the Colorado River is one of the most intriguing puzzles in all of geology. When we look at the immense depth of the canyon, it is natural to assume that the river has been flowing here since the dawn of time, slowly wearing away the earth. over hundreds of millions of years. For decades, geologists shared this sense of wonder and engaged in a long, thoughtful debate over whether the river was old or young. Some researchers believed the river system began its work shortly after the dinosaurs disappeared, perhaps 70 million years ago. Others looked at the evidence and saw a much more recent story, a narrative that began long after the landscape had already taken its general shape. Take a slow, deep breath and let that sense of mystery settle. Imagine the scientists of the past century walking these trails and examining the gravels and fossils, trying to piece together a timeline that spans more than a human mind can easily grasp. After years of study, the consensus among most modern geologists has shifted toward a surprising conclusion. The Colorado River, in the form we recognize today, is actually quite young. Current evidence suggests that the river began carving the Grand Canyon only about 5 to 6 million years ago. To a human, 6 million years is an unfathomable stretch of time. But in the context of the Earth's 4.5 billion year history, it is a mere heartbeat. If the entire history of the Earth were condensed into a single 24-hour day, the Colorado River would have only arrived in the very last few minutes before midnight. It is a newcomer to a very old neighborhood. This realization brings with it a sense of quiet awe. How could such a young river slip through such old rock so quickly? We are looking at a river that is only a few million years old, yet it has managed to slice through nearly 2 billion years of geological history. It is as if a newcomer walked into a library filled with ancient dusty volumes and managed to read through every single page in a single afternoon. The speed of the canyon's creation is almost as impressive as its scale, suggesting that the river had a tremendous amount of energy behind it from the very moment it began its journey. The secret to this rapid carving lies in a dramatic change that occurred in the landscape itself. The river didn't simply start flowing faster on its own. It was given a powerful helping hand by the Earth. Long before the river arrived, a series of massive tectonic events known as the Laramide orogeny began to reshape the American West. This wasn't a sudden or violent shift, but a slow, steady pulse of energy from deep within the planet. It was a process that would eventually lift the entire region, creating a high, flat stage for the river to perform its work. As we prepare to look closer at this great movement of the crust, feel the stability of the ground beneath you, knowing that even the most massive changes in nature happen with a patient, rhythmic grace. This massive elevation of the land would provide the gravity and the momentum the river needed to begin its deep descent. Imagine the entire landscape for hundreds of miles in every direction beginning to rise. This is the great uplift, a quiet but monumental shift in the Earth's crust that set the stage for everything we see today. It is one of the most remarkable chapters in the canyon story, specifically because of how remarkably gentle it was. Usually, when the Earth's plates collide and the land is pushed upward, the rock layers are crumpled, folded, and tilted into jagged mountain peaks. But the Colorado Plateau was different. It rose like a massive, steady elevator, lifting thousands of feet into the air while keeping its ancient layers almost perfectly horizontal. This massive block of the Earth's crust, covering parts of 4 states, remained stable and intact as it ascended. It is as if a giant hand reached beneath a stack of colorful blankets and lifted them all at once, keeping the surface flat and smooth. Because of this, the layers of stone we've been exploring, the limestones, the sandstones, and the shales, remained stacked like a deck of cards, waiting for the river to arrive. This uplift brought the land from near sea level to the high-altitude desert we see today, with the rims of the canyon now sitting between 7,000 and 9,000 feet above the distant ocean. The significance of this height cannot be overstated. In the world of geology and physics, elevation is potential energy. By raising the land so high, the great uplift gave the Colorado River a tremendous gift, the gift of gravity. As the water began to flow from the mountains toward the sea, it found itself high above its destined shallow. This vertical distance meant the water didn't just drift lazily across the plains, it gathered speed and power. The river became a liquid buzzsaw, fueled by the relentless pull of gravity, allowing it to slice downward through the rock with immense, focused force. Without this uplift, the Colorado might have been a slow, meandering stream. Instead, it became one of the most powerful erosive forces on the planet. As you contemplate this vast, silent rising of the earth, take a slow, deep breath. Allow yourself to feel the sensation of being lifted and supported, much like the plateau itself. You are resting on a foundation that is deep, stable, and incredibly strong. There is a profound peace in knowing that the ground beneath us has the strength to hold up entire mountain ranges and plateaus for millions of years. Let that sense of stability move through your body, from your head down to your toes, as you settle deeper into your blankets. The river had the height, and it had the power. It began its work, cutting a deep, narrow groove into the rising land. But as we look out from the rim at sunset, we see a landscape that is far more than just a narrow slit in the earth. In some places, the opposite rim is 18 miles away. The river itself, even at its widest, is only a tiny fraction of that distance. This leads us to a fascinating puzzle. If the river is the tool that cuts the canyon, and the river is relatively narrow, how did the Grand Canyon become so incredibly wide? To understand this, we must look away from the water and toward the air, the ice, and the very nature of the rock itself. When you look across the abyss, you're seeing the work of more than just water. If the Colorado River were the only force at play, the Grand Canyon would look like a narrow, deep crack, a slot canyon barely wider than the river itself. But instead, it is a vast open bowl of stone, a cathedral of space. This widening is the result of a process geologists call mass wasting. It is a slow, patient dismantling of the canyon walls, driven by the relentless forces of nature that work while the river is busy cutting deep. Think of the canyon walls as a stack of books that someone is slowly pulling from the bottom. As the river carves downward, it removes the foundation of the cliffs above. Without that support, gravity begins to take hold. But gravity needs a little help to break the solid rock apart, and that help comes from the weather. One of the most powerful tools in the canyon's arsenal is something called frost wedging. During the winter months, and even on chilly spring nights, Snow melts into liquid water and trickles into the tiny microscopic cracks in the limestone and sandstone. When the temperature drops after sunset, that water freezes into ice. As water freezes, it expands by about 9%, acting like a silent, powerful wedge driven into the heart of the stone. Over thousands of years, this nightly cycle of freezing and thawing pries the rocks apart, inch by agonizing inch. Eventually, a block of stone, perhaps the size of a pebble or perhaps the size of a house, loses its grip. It falls tumbling down the slopes in a sudden dusty descent until it reaches the bottom. These rockfalls are the primary way the canyon grows wider. It is a constant shifting dance between the vertical power of the river and the horizontal reach of the atmosphere. You might wonder why the canyon doesn't just fill up with all this fallen debris. This is where the partnership between the water and the weather becomes truly remarkable. The river acts as a giant conveyor belt. As the walls collapse and the rocks tumble into the water, the Colorado River catches them, grinds them down into silt, and carries them away toward the sea. The river clears the stage so that the weather can continue its work. It is a perfect cycle. The river cuts down, the weather pulls the walls apart, and the river sweeps the floor clean. As you listen to the imagined sound of the wind moving across these wide spaces, let your own mind expand. There is so much room here. There is no crowding, no pressure, just the vast open air of the high desert. Feel the weight of your body sinking into your bed, just as the rocks of the canyon settle into their natural resting places. You are part of a world that knows how to let go of what it no longer needs to hold on to. The way the canyon widens, however, isn't uniform. It doesn't move back in a straight line. If you look closely at the profile of the walls, you'll notice they aren't flat. They have a distinct rhythm, a pattern of sharp cliffs and gentle sloping benches. This unique shape, which gives the Grand Canyon its iconic architectural look, is determined by the personality of the rocks themselves. Some layers are stubborn and strong, while others are soft and yielding, and the way they react to the wind and the rain creates the magnificent staircase of stone that leads us deeper into the earth. If you were to trace the silhouette of the canyon walls with your finger against the horizon, you wouldn't find a smooth, straight line. Instead, your finger would move in a steady, rhythmic pattern of vertical drops and long, reclining slopes. Geologists call this the stair-step profile, and it is perhaps the most defining architectural feature of the Grand Canyon. It is a visual record of how different materials respond to the passage of time, a physical manifestation of the varying personalities of the Earth's layers. This unique shape exists because not all rock is created equal. In the world of geology, we talk about differential erosion. This simply means that some rocks are more resistant to the elements than others. Think of the hard layers, the limestones and the sandstones, as the stubborn guardians of the canyon. These rocks are strong and well cemented. When the wind blows and the rain falls, they refuse to crumble easily. Instead, they hold their ground, remaining as sheer vertical cliffs that drop hundreds of feet straight down. They are the structural pillars of the canyon's architecture, providing the dramatic heights that take our breath away. But between these mighty cliffs lie the softer layers, primarily the shales and siltstones. These rocks are more yielding, composed of fine muds and clays from ancient quiet waters. They do not have the internal strength to stand as vertical walls. When they are exposed to the weather, they disintegrate relatively quickly, washing away into gentle, debris-covered slopes. These slopes act as the landings on our giant staircase, providing a resting place for the eye and a foundation for the next great cliff to rise above. Imagine mapping this architecture in your mind as you drift closer to sleep. You can see the massive vertical face of the red wall limestone glowing in the late light. Below it, the land softens and slants away in the greenish-gray slopes of the Bright Angel Shale. This alternating rhythm of cliff, slope, creates a sense of deep structural harmony. It is as if the earth itself is breathing, expanding in the soft slopes and holding its breath in the rigid cliffs. As you lie there, let your own body find that same sense of architectural balance. Feel the strength in your bones like the solid limestone cliffs, and the softness in your muscles like the yielding shale slopes. There is a place for both strength and softness in this landscape, and there is a place for both in you. The canyon does not rush its growth. It simply follows the path laid out by the nature of the stone. This grand staircase doesn't just move in one direction. While we often focus on the main gorge carved by the Colorado River, the canyon is actually a vast branching network. The stair-step walls are interrupted by deep, winding gashes that lead away from the river and into the heart of the plateau. These are the side canyons and tributaries, the smaller, secret worlds that hold their own mysteries. Just as a great tree has many branches, the Grand Canyon has thousands of these smaller paths, each one contributing to the immense complexity of the landscape we see today. If the main river is the heart of this world, these side canyons are the veins carrying water, life, and even more ancient stories into the deep silence of the stone. Step away from the wide panoramic views of the main rim for a moment and let your mind wander into the narrow, sheltered embrace of a side canyon. While the Colorado River is the master architect of this landscape, it has many smaller assistants. There are hundreds of these tributary canyons branching off from the main gorge. Some so narrow you could touch both walls at once, others wide enough to hold their own mountain ranges. They are the secret galleries of the Grand Canyon, places where the scale becomes intimate and the sounds of the desert are amplified by the close proximity of the stone. These canyons are often born from the smallest of beginnings, a crack in the rock, a seasonal stream, or the sudden, violent energy of a flash flood. In the high desert, rain doesn't always soak into the parched earth. Instead, it gathers and rushes downward, carrying sand and boulders that scour the rock like a sculptor's chisel. Over thousands of years, these intermittent bursts of water have carved deep gashes into the plateau, creating a labyrinth that adds to the canyon's staggering complexity. Consider Bright Angel Creek, one of the most famous of these tributaries. It flows year-round, fed by roaring springs that burst forth directly from the canyon walls. Because it follows the line of an ancient geological fault, the Bright Angel Fault, it has cut a remarkably straight and deep path through the layers. Walking along its banks is like entering an entirely different world. While the rim above might be baking in the summer sun, the bottom of a side canyon often hosts a delicate, cool microclimate. Here, you might find lush groves of cottonwood trees, their heart-shaped leaves shimmering in the slightest breeze. You might see the vibrant green of maidenhair ferns clinging to damp rock faces where water seeps slowly through the limestone. Take a slow, deep breath and imagine you are standing at the base of Ribbon Falls, a hidden gem tucked away in a side canyon. The water doesn't crash here. It falls in a soft, lacy veil over a giant, moss-covered spire of mineral deposits called travertine. Listen to the sound in your a gentle, rhythmic patter against the stone, echoing softly off the high redwoods. The air here is noticeably cooler, smelling of wet earth and fresh growth. It is a sanctuary of quiet, a place where the vastness of geological time feels peaceful rather than overwhelming. The stone walls around you act as a natural acoustic chamber, catching the sound of the trickling water and holding it close like a lullaby. As you rest in this cool, shaded oasis, notice how the water has smoothed the edges of the boulders in the creek bed, turning rough giants into rounded, tactile shapes. This is the persistent, patient work of the water, moving grain by grain, year after year. Every side canyon is a testament to this persistence, showing us that even the smallest stream can leave an indelible mark on the world if given enough time. But as we look at these peaceful streams and the intricate carvings they've made, we must remember that the history of this landscape hasn't always been written in water alone. There were times when the canyon was shaped by forces far more intense and chaotic. Deep within the western reaches of the canyon, the story shifts from the slow erosion of water to the sudden fiery intervention of the Earth's inner heat. Just as the river carved its way down, the earth beneath it was preparing to push something back up, leading to a dramatic era where fire and water would finally meet. Imagine standing at the edge of the Western Canyon in a place known as the Toro Weep Valley. Here, the familiar red and orange layers of the canyon walls are suddenly interrupted by something darker, something forged in the deep heat of the earth. Looming over the rim is Vulcan's throne, a massive cinder cone that serves as a silent monument to a time when fire literally met water. Visualize a moment in the relatively recent geological past, within the last few 100,000 years, when the earth beneath this plateau began to stir. Molten rock, glowing with a dull, heavy heat, goes through cracks in the crust and spilled over the rim of the canyon. It did not flow quickly like a river of water. Instead, it cascaded down the cliffs like a slow, incandescent curtain of stone, cooling as it moved, turning from a liquid glow into a solid, jagged blackness. These were the lava falls of the Grand Canyon, a spectacle of nature where the internal heat of the planet poured into the deep chasm carved by the river. As this lava reached the bottom, it did something extraordinary. It began to fill the narrow gorge, cooling rapidly against the cold water of the Colorado River, creating massive, natural dams of solid basalt. These weren't small obstructions. Some of these lava dams reached staggering heights, standing over 2,000 feet tall, nearly half the depth of the canyon itself. Behind these walls of black rock, the Colorado River was forced to stop. The water backed up for hundreds of miles, creating vast, quiet lakes that stretched deep into the heart of the canyon, drowning the rapids and the banks in a temporary, watery silence. Take a slow, rhythmic breath and imagine the stillness of those ancient volcanic lakes. the sun would have reflected off the obsidian dark surfaces of the basalt, and the air would have been heavy with the scent of minerals. It is a strange thought to realize that as recently as 100,000 years ago, a mere heartbeat in the canyon's 2 billion-year history, this landscape was a series of giant steps with the river held captive by fire-born walls. Yet, the Colorado River is nothing if not persistent. With the weight of the entire Rocky Mountain drainage behind it, the river began to rise against the face of each dam. Eventually, the water would overtop the basalt, spilling over the edge in massive waterfalls, and the slow process of reclamation would begin. Grain by grain, pebble by pebble, the river used its sediment to saw through the black rock. Over thousands of years, the river broke through every single one of these dams, grinding the basalt into sand and washing it away toward the sea. Today, if you look closely at the walls in the Western Canyon, you can still see the remnants of this fiery era. Dark streaks and plugs of basalt still cling to the red limestone like black scars on the landscape, marking exactly where the lava once flowed. They are reminders that even the most formidable barriers are temporary when faced with the steady, patient flow of time and water. The river always finds its way back to its bed, reclaiming its path through the stone. As the memory of the fire cools in your mind, let your thoughts drift away from the dramatic shifts of the Earth's crust and toward the smaller, quieter stories held within the layers themselves. The stone is more than just a record of fire and erosion. It is a library of life. Within the very rocks we have been exploring, there are delicate traces of creatures that lived and breathed long before the first volcano ever stirred. To understand the canyon fully, we must look closer at the tiny preserved details that tell us who was here before us, locked forever in the embrace of the ancient seabed. If you were to kneel down on the very edge of the south rim and run your fingers along the rough cream-colored surface of the Kaibab limestone, you might feel something more than just the texture of stone. You might feel the rounded curve of a shell or the delicate, star-shaped impression of a tiny stem. This top layer, the one we stand upon to gaze into the abyss, is not just a cap of rock. It is a vast, silent graveyard of an ocean that vanished long before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth. It is a library of life, where the stories of the Permian period are pressed between pages of stone. Among the most common treasures found here are the brachiopods. At first glance, they look like the seashells you might find on a modern beach, small, symmetrical, and hinged. But these are ancient creatures, distinct from the clams we know today. Beside them, you might find the fossilized remains of crinoids, often called sea lilies. Though they look like delicate plants with long, segmented stems and flowery tops, they were actually animals related to starfish, swaying gently in the currents of a warm, shallow sea. Imagine those ancient waters, turquoise and clear, where these stone lilies danced in slow motion across the seabed. By studying these tiny remnants, geologists can reconstruct a world that no longer exists. The presence of specific types of sponges and corals tells us that this water was tropical and shallow enough for sunlight to reach the bottom. It was a peaceful, rhythmic environment where life moved slowly, governed by the tides and the soft filtering of nutrients from the water. There were no massive predators here, no terrifying monsters, just the quiet, steady pulse of a thriving marine community. It is a humbling thought to realize that this life existed in a window of time before the age of giants. We often think of fossils and immediately imagine the great dinosaurs, the Tyrannosaurus or the Stegosaurus. But the Grand Canyon's upper layers hold the story of the world before that, a time when the oceans were the primary stage for life's grand experiment. These creatures lived, died, and were buried in the silt, their forms replaced by minerals over millions of years, until they became the very ground beneath our feet. As we move our focus just a little deeper, leaving the limestone rim behind and looking toward the sloping walls of the desert layers below, the nature of the fossils begins to change. We move from the body fossils, the shells and skeletons of the creatures themselves, to something more personal and fleeting. We begin to find trace fossils, the preserved evidence of movement. In the layers where the sea retreated and the great dunes began to blow, there are stories written not in shells, but in footsteps, captured forever in the frozen sands of time. As we move away from the ancient, shell-filled limestone of the rim and look down toward the massive, sloping walls of the Coconino sandstone, the story of life changes. We leave behind the deep, quiet waters of the sea and step into a world of wind and sun. These towering cream-colored cliffs were once a vast sea of sand dunes, stretching for hundreds of miles. And it is here, within these frozen waves of stone, that we find some of the most intimate records of the past. The Coconino trackways. Unlike the fossils of the layers above, these are not the remains of the animals themselves. There are no bones or teeth found in this layer. Instead, we find trace fossils, the preserved evidence of a single moment in time. If you were to look closely at the flat surfaces of these sandstone slabs, you would see rows of tiny, delicate indentations. They are footprints left by small, lizard-like creatures that scurried across the dunes nearly 280 million years ago. Imagine the desert as it was then. The air is dry and the sun is high, casting long, sharp shadows across the shifting slopes of sand. A small creature, perhaps no longer than your hand, makes its way across the face of a dune. Its tiny claws press into the sand, leaving a perfect trail of 5-toed prints. Because the sand was likely slightly damp, perhaps from a rare morning mist or a passing shadow of a cloud, the prints held their shape just long enough for the wind to cover them with a fresh, gentle layer of dry sand, sealing them away for eternity. One of the most fascinating mysteries of these trackways is that almost all of them lead in one direction, uphill. For decades, geologists have puzzled over why these ancient travelers seemed so determined to climb. Some suggest the animals were escaping the intense heat of the lower basin, seeking the cooler breezes at the crest of the dunes. Others believe they were moving toward water, or perhaps the way the sun baked the sand made the uphill tracks deeper and easier to preserve, while the light, downward steps simply vanished. Take a slow, deep breath now. As you exhale, visualize those tiny, steady footsteps. There is a profound peace in the thought of such a small, quiet journey being remembered by the earth for hundreds of millions of years. The creature is long gone, but its path remains etched into the very foundation of the canyon. It reminds us that even the smallest movements, the most quiet of lives, leave a mark upon the world. Feel the weight of your own body resting now, safe and grounded, just as the heavy sands once settled over those delicate prints to keep them safe. As we linger here among the dunes of the Coconino, we begin to notice that the stone is not just a single shade of tan. As the light of our imagined sunset shifts, the walls begin to shimmer with a new intensity. The stories of the canyon are written in the shapes of the rocks, but they are told through the language of color. The transition from the pale sands of the desert to the deep burning hues of the layers below marks our entry into the most vibrant part of this geological masterpiece. The very minerals that make up these stones are about to reveal a palette of reds, oranges, and purples that have defined the Grand Canyon in the hearts of all who see it. As you gaze out across the expanse, the sheer variety of colors begins to wash over you. It is a palette that feels almost impossible, a spectrum of reds, burnt oranges, and deep regal purples that seem to glow from within the stone itself. These aren't just surface colors. They are the result of a slow, chemical dance between the earth and the atmosphere that has lasted for eons. The primary artist behind this masterpiece is iron. Most of the rocks in the Grand Canyon contain at least a small amount of iron-bearing minerals. When these minerals are exposed to oxygen and water, they undergo a process much like the rusting of a piece of metal left in the rain. This oxidation creates the vivid hues that define the landscape. When you look at the deep blood-red cliffs of the Red Wall or the rich crimson slopes of the Hermit Shale, you are seeing the presence of hematite. Hematite is a form of iron oxide that acts as a natural pigment, staining the rocks with a color so intense it can look like a sunset captured in stone. In other areas where the canyon takes on a warmer, more golden appearance, a different mineral is at work, limonite. This is another form of iron oxide, but it produces the brilliant yellows and soft sandy oranges that catch the light during the middle of the day. And in the deepest, most ancient layers, or in the crevices where the shadows linger, you might see streaks of dark purple or even black. These are often caused by manganese, a mineral that adds a bruised, velvety texture to the walls. It is fascinating to realize that many of these rocks are not actually red all the way through. If you were to break open a piece of the Red Wall limestone, you would find that the interior is a cool, bluish gray. The red is a beautiful mask, a thin veneer of iron oxide that has dripped down from the layers above, painting the cliff faces over millions of years. Because of this, the Grand Canyon functions as a giant natural canvas that changes with every passing hour. It is a painting that is never finished. In the harsh light of midday, the colors can seem flat and pale, but as the afternoon wanes, the shadows begin to stretch. The low angle of the sun breathes life into the minerals, making the hematite glow like hot coals, and the limonite shine like gold. Take a moment to breathe in the stillness of this place. Visualize the colors around you beginning to soften and deepen. The fiery oranges are mellowing into a gentle amber, and the bright reds are turning into a quiet, comforting maroon. The air is starting to lose the heat of the day, and the canyon is preparing for its nightly rest. The vibrant, busy display of the sunlit walls is slowly fading, making room for a different kind of beauty. As the light retreats, our perspective begins to shift away from the solid, colorful earth and toward the vast, darkening void of the sky above, where the first hints of twilight are waiting to emerge. As we watch from the rim, the last sliver of the sun finally dips below the western edge of the world. This is the moment of the great surrender, where the day's vibrant energy gives way to the soft blue hush of twilight. The transition is subtle at first, a gradual softening of the sharp lines that define the cliffs. But soon, the transformation is undeniable. The canyon begins to fold in on itself, retreating into a world of silhouettes and secrets. The shadows do not simply fall. They seem to rise from the depths of the inner gorge like a dark, silent tide. They pool at the base of the great unconformity and climb steadily upward, swallowing the red slopes and the white cliffs one by one. Down at the very bottom, the Colorado River, which only an hour ago was a shimmering green ribbon reflecting the sky, has vanished from our sight. It is now a hidden pulse at the heart of the stone, its presence known only by the faint, distant roar that drifts up on the rising evening breeze. As the light fades, you may notice a distinct change in the atmosphere. The Grand Canyon is so vast that it creates its own weather, acting as a great Ronto vessel that holds and moves air in unique ways. Because the elevation drops so significantly from the rim to the floor, the canyon contains several different climate zones, much like moving from the cool forests of the north to the arid deserts of the south in a single afternoon. This vertical journey creates a remarkable temperature gradient. It is common for the temperature to vary by 30 degrees or more between the high, pine-scented rims and the rocky floor below. While the bottom of the canyon may still be radiating the intense heat it gathered during the day, here on the rim, the air is becoming crisp and thin. Take a slow, deep breath and feel that cool evening air settling over the landscape. It carries the scent of damp earth and drying sea, a refreshing contrast to the baking sun of midday. As the rocks begin to cool, they release a faint, earthy aroma, the scent of ancient dust finally finding rest. Allow your muscles to relax into this newfound coolness. The heavy golden heat has lifted, replaced by a lightness that seems to settle in your chest. The world around you is becoming simplified, the complex textures of the rock layers merging into broad, dark shapes against the fading light. There is a profound sense of stillness that comes with this hour, a feeling that the earth is finally exhaling after a long, bright day. Looking up, the sky is no longer the brilliant turquoise of the afternoon. It has deepened into a bruised purple, then a rich indigo, and finally a velvet black at the very top of the dome. The first few stars are beginning to pierce through the veil, tiny cold pinpricks of light that seem much closer and more brilliant than they truly are. In this high, dry air, away from the glow of distant cities, the transition to night is absolute. We are standing on the edge of a great darkness, but it is not a hollow or frightening dark. It is a protective blanket, a quiet space where the ancient history of the earth and the infinite reach of the stars are about to meet in the deepest skies of the American Southwest. The Grand Canyon is not only a monument to the history of the earth, it is also a window into the history of the universe. Because of its remote location, and the dedicated efforts to preserve its natural environment, the canyon has been officially designated as an international dark sky park. This is a rare and precious status, awarded only to those places on our planet where the night sky remains truly unpolluted by the glow of human civilization. As you stand here in the deepening dark, you are experiencing a sky that looks almost exactly as it did to the people who lived on these rims thousands of years ago. In our modern world, we often forget how many stars truly exist. In a typical city, the haze of artificial light hides all but the brightest few. But here, as your eyes fully adjust to the darkness, the sky begins to fill with an almost overwhelming number of stars, thousands upon thousands of them, shimmering like fine diamond dust scattered across a dark velvet cloth. The air is so thin and dry at this elevation that the stars do not just twinkle. They pulse with a steady, ancient light that has traveled through the vacuum of space for years, centuries, or even millennia, just to reach your eyes tonight. The centerpiece of this celestial display is the Milky Way. It stretches from one horizon to the other, a luminous, glowing river of light that seems to mirror the path of the Colorado River far below. You can see the intricate details of our galaxy, the dark rifts of interstellar dust, and the dense, crowded clusters of stars that form the galactic core. It is a sight that is both humbling and deeply peaceful. There is a strange and beautiful phenomenon that happens here when the night is at its darkest. If you look toward the horizon, you cannot see the rock of the canyon walls at all, for there is no light to reflect off them. Instead, you see the canyon's presence as a massive, jagged void. The stars simply stop where the rim begins. This silhouette, the blackness of the earth set against the brilliance of the cosmos, allows you to perceive the immense scale of the canyon even in total darkness. You are standing on the edge of a great terrestrial abyss, looking out into an even greater celestial one. The vastness of space above you perfectly mirrors the vastness of the canyon beneath you. Both are reminders of the incredible scales of time and distance that define our existence. The light you see from the star Vega left its source 25 years ago, while the light from the Andromeda Galaxy has been traveling for 2.5 million years. Just as the layers of rock in the canyon are a record of the Earth's past, the light from these stars is a record of the universe's history. As you gaze upward, feel the weight of your body supported by the ancient stone of the rim. You are a small, quiet observer in a very large and very old world. The frantic pace of daily life feels incredibly distant now, replaced by the slow, rhythmic turning of the earth under the stars. The cool air continues to settle, and with the departure of the sun's energy, the world around you begins to lose its vibration. The wind that whispered through the pines earlier has softened to a mere breath, and a new quality begins to emerge from the darkness. It is a profound, heavy stillness, the beginning of the canyon's great silence. As the night deepens, you become aware of a presence that is almost tactile, a phenomenon often called the Great Silence. It is not merely the absence of noise, but a profound, heavy stillness that seems to have a weight of its own. In our modern world, we are rarely exposed to true silence. There is almost always the hum of a machine, the distant roll of tires, or the faint buzz of electronics. But here, miles from the nearest city and shielded by billions of tons of rock, the silence is absolute and all-encompassing. The geology of the canyon plays a vital role in creating this sanctuary of quiet. The various layers of stone, the porous limestones, the flaky shales, and the dense weathered sandstones act as natural acoustic insulators. While a flat, hard surface like a concrete wall reflects sound and causes echoes, the complex, jagged, and multi-textured faces of the canyon walls absorb sound waves. They swallow the wind and dampen the vibrations of the world above. It is as if the earth itself has been engineered to be a cathedral of stillness, a place where the air holds its breath. When you speak a word here, it does not ring out. It is gently cradled and then dissolved by the vastness of the space. Yet, sound behaves in strange and beautiful ways within this deep chasm. On a night this calm, the atmosphere can occasionally form a temperature inversion, where a layer of cool air is trapped beneath a layer of warmer air. This can create a natural megaphone effect. You might find it hard to believe, but the roar of a massive rapid on the Colorado River, perhaps Granite Rapids or the legendary Crystal Rapids, can sometimes be heard from the rim nearly a mile above the water. It doesn't arrive as a loud crash, but as a ghostly, low-frequency thrum, a rhythmic pulse that feels as though the canyon itself is breathing. It is a soft, steady reminder that even in the deepest silence, the river is still at work, tirelessly carving its way through the dark foundation of the world. Take a slow, deep breath now. As you exhale, let your mind sink into that silence. Imagine it wrapping around you like a thick velvet blanket, shielding you from the distractions and the frantic noise of your daily life. There is no need to listen for anything, and there is nothing you need to do. The silence here is safe. It is a sanctuary where you are allowed to simply exist, grounded and supported by the ancient, unmoving stone. There is a deep comfort in the permanence of this rock. These layers have stood in this same stillness for eras beyond our comprehension. Long before the first human ears were here to listen, the canyon was practicing this silence. It has watched the stars drift across the sky for millions of nights, just like this one, unaffected by the passing of seasons or the rise and fall of civilizations. As you rest here on the rim, you are participating in a tradition of quiet that stretches back to the very dawn of time. The stone beneath you is cold and solid, a silent witness to the history of the planet, waiting patiently as we begin to contemplate the staggering, dizzying scales of time that have shaped every grain of sand in this abyss. To sit on the rim of the Grand Canyon is to stand at the edge of something geologists call deep time. It is a concept that is difficult for the human mind to fully embrace, because our lives are measured in decades, while the life of the earth is measured in billions of years. When we look out over the layers of the canyon, we aren't just looking at rock. We are looking at a physical manifestation of the passage of time itself. Every inch of stone represents thousands of years of quiet accumulation, and every mile of depth represents ages that have long since vanished from the surface of the world. There is a profound peace in trying to visualize this scale. If the entire history of our planet were compressed into a single 24-hour day, starting at the stroke of midnight, The first 4 billion years would pass in a slow, steady blur of shifting tectonic plates and rising oceans. On this clock, the rocks at the very bottom of the canyon, the dark shimmering Vishnu schist, wouldn't even begin to form until the mid-afternoon around 2 or 3 o'clock. For hours and hours of that metaphorical day, the foundation of the canyon was being forged in the heat and pressure of the deep earth. And yet, the most surprising part of the story is how recently the canyon itself appeared. On that same 24-hour clock, the Colorado River didn't even begin to carve its way through these layers until about 1 or 2 minutes before midnight. The entire human experience, everything we have ever known or recorded, would take up only the final fraction of a second. It is easy to feel small when faced with such numbers, but in this quiet darkness, that smallness feels like a gift. It is a comforting realization. It means that the world is vast and enduring, and that the worries of our day, the small anxieties, the frantic pace of our schedules, are but a heartbeat in the grand rhythmic breathing of the planet. We are visitors in a very long and very patient story. Knowing this allows you to let go of the need to hold everything together. The earth has been turning, the mountains have been rising, and the rivers have been flowing for billions of years without any effort from us. You can lean back into the stability of the present moment, knowing that you are held by a world that has seen everything and remains steady. Take a slow, soft breath and feel that sense of perspective settling into your bones. Like the layers of the canyon, you are grounded. You are part of a sequence that stretches all back to the beginning of time and will continue long into the future. There is no rush here. There is only the slow, magnificent unfolding of the earth. As we rest here in the stillness, we can take comfort in the fact that while the history of the canyon is long, it is not yet complete. The story didn't stop when the river reached the granite at the bottom, and it doesn't stop tonight. Even as the stars wheel overhead and the silence deepens, the canyon is preparing for its next chapter. It is a living landscape, still growing, still deepening, and still reaching toward a future we can only begin to imagine. It is a common mistake to think of the Grand Canyon as a finished masterpiece, a static monument frozen in time for us to admire. But in reality, the canyon is still growing. Even now, as you lie in the stillness of your room, and as the moonlight casts long silver shadows across the ancient stone, the work continues. The earth is never truly still, and the story of this landscape is being written with every passing second, grain by grain, drop by drop. The Colorado River, though it may look like a thin green ribbon from the high vantage point of the rim, remains a tireless sculptor. Down in the darkness of the inner gorge, it continues to press against its bed, carrying away grains of sand and microscopic flakes of schist. It is deepening its path, inching closer to the very heart of the planet. There is a profound patience in this process. The river does not hurry. It does not need to. It has the backing of gravity and the weight of eons. It simply flows, and in that flowing, it quietly changes the world. Scientists have studied the rate of this change, and the numbers they find are a measurement of time that invites a deep restful sense of calm. On average, the Grand Canyon widens by about the thickness of a single sheet of paper every year. Think of how thin that is. A fraction of a millimeter, barely enough to feel between your thumb and forefinger. It is a change so subtle that if you stood on the rim for your entire life, you would never see it happen. It is a whisper of movement in a world of silence. And yet, over the course of centuries and millennia, those single sheets of paper add up. They accumulate into the vast, breathtaking miles of space that now sit between the north and south rims. This slow, steady progress reminds us that change does not have to be chaotic or loud. It can be inevitable and quiet. The canyon does not resist the river, and the river does not fight the stone. They exist in a long, slow dance of transformation. There is a great comfort in this kind of permanence, a permanence that is not fixed, but fluid. The canyon remains even as it grows. It is a reminder that we too can grow and evolve without losing our foundation. We can move through the different seasons of our lives with the same grace as the stone, allowing the currents of time to shape us into something deeper, more expansive, and more complex. As we begin to pull our thoughts back from the depths of the inner gorge, we carry this sense of quiet movement with us. The air around you is still. Your body is heavy and relaxed, sinking into the support of your bed just as the layers of the canyon settle into the earth. The world outside is turning, the river is flowing, and the canyon is expanding, one paper-thin layer at a time. All is as it should be. You are part of this rhythm, a tiny but significant note in a symphony that has no end. We are moving toward a final moment of reflection, a last look at the rim before we let the day go completely and drift into the soft embrace of sleep. Let your mind wander back up from the depths now, ascending slowly through those layers of Te'en until you find yourself once again standing on the quiet edge of the rim. The journey we have taken tonight has been a long one, spanning nearly 2 billion years of our planet's life. Yet here, in the stillness of the desert night, it feels as though time has paused just for you. The air at the surface is crisp and thin, scented with the faint, sweet perfume of sagebrush and the cooling stone. From this height, the canyon is no longer a collection of individual rocks or stories, but a singular, magnificent whole, a vast, dark shadow etched into the crust of the earth, resting under the watchful eyes of 1,000 stars. Take a final slow sweep of the landscape in your mind's eye. High above, the Kaibab limestone forms the sturdy platform beneath your feet, the youngest of the layers, yet still ancient beyond human reckoning. Below it, the Coconino Seastone glows faintly in the starlight, a frozen desert of white dunes. Deeper still, the massive red wall stands like a silent fortress, and at the very bottom, tucked away in the deepest folds of the inner gorge, the Vishnu schist remains, as it has for eons, the dark crystalline foundation of the world. Between these layers, the Colorado River continues its rhythmic work, a silver thread of movement that is almost invisible now in the shadows of the cliffs. It is easy to see why the Grand Canyon is considered the greatest geological classroom on Earth. Nowhere else can a person stand in one place and see such a significant portion of our planet's history laid bare, page by page, in a library of stone. It contains nearly 40 distinct rock layers, each one a record of a world that once was, of tropical seas, vast swamps, and towering sand dunes. It is a place where the missing pieces of time, like the great unconformity, remind us that mystery is just as much a part of the Earth's story as the rocks themselves. But for tonight, the lessons are over. The facts and the figures can rest settling into the back of your mind like silt on the riverbed. What remains is a profound sense of perspective. You are standing on the edge of something that has endured through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and the slow drift of continents. It is steady. It is grounded, and in its presence you are safe. There is a great peace in knowing that the world is so old and so resilient, and that you are a part of its enduring beauty. Feel the weight of your body as it presses into the softness of your bed, as solid and supported as the canyon floor. The silence of the desert is yours now. The stillness of the ancient stone is yours. Let the vastness of the canyon expand in your mind until it becomes a soft, dark space where you can let go of the day completely. The stars above the rim are dimming now, and the world is falling into a deep, restorative hush. You have traveled through time and stone, and now you have arrived at the most important destination of all, a place of perfect rest. The river flows on, the canyon grows in its quiet way, and the earth continues its slow, steady turn through the cosmos. Everything is in its right place. You are safe. You are grounded. You are home. Sleep now. Good night.